About Patsy Cline's plane crash here on Addressing Winchester today with our first expert we're going to work with, a friend of Winchester, a friend of mine, the great Phil Spaugy is joining today from somewhere deep in the Buckeye state of Ohio. So how you doing, Phil?
I'm fine. I can get an opportunity to take off my Iron Brigade black hat and screw on my helmet and goggles
Yeah, good deal. Yeah, Phil's a
on this one.
yeah.
Yeah,
Phil's an expert in many things. He's a Civil War historian, Iron Brigade. He's an aviation man, a pilot, a little bit of everything in his background. So, Phil, tell me, we've talked before. Your thing that brings you to Winchester. You've been here like what 90 some times over the past like 40 years or so.
yeah. I started. Yeah, it was all because of the NSSA national skirmishes. So I started shooting in with the NSSA in '78, and I haven't missed a year coming to Winchester at least twice since '78, and sometimes a lot more. So yeah, I've watched the town grow from a pretty quaint Shenandoah Valley town to the almost bedroom community metropolis it is now. You
Yes,
know,
definitely a community of DC. It has changed a lot. Even in
oh
the
boy,
last 30 years, it has changed. 36
you
years.
know, the big thing is the traffic,
Yeah, it's
and yeah, it's been interesting to watch that whole dynamic. But yeah, I really enjoy the area. Um, I didn't know it when I started, but thanks to research by my wife Amy, I've got a lot of ancestor connections with the Bonstocks and the Hartzels and the Parlays in that part of the valley too. So pretty cool.
Yeah, very good. And more important to today's topic, you once owned a flight school and have an aviation background. So can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, I've been I started my aviation career when I was a senior in high school because I needed a job, and living in Vandalia, which is just north of Dayton, and actually is where the Dayton International Airport is. Um, I always had I liked airplanes, I liked aviation, but I needed a job more than anything else. So I got a job with a company called Aviation Sales Incorporated in '73 as a lineman, pumping gas, washing airplanes, that sort of thing. And through a series of very fortuitous circumstances from '73 on, the people who owned the company took a liking to me. They taught me to fly. I ended up being their dispatcher for their charter department, eventually a vice president. And then in '86, uh, my business partner, Rick Penwell, and I basically purchased the business from the owners. So, and all of a sudden in 2019, we had two operations in Dayton, one at Dayton International and one at a small airport, Dayton Wright Brothers, um, which is south of town, which is where we had our flight training fleet and our maintenance. In 2019, we sold that operation, and we kept the smaller operation at Dayton International, which my son manages right now. So um, the operation down Dayton Wright Brothers had our flight training department. When we sold it, we had oh more than a dozen airplanes, uh, about the same amount of instructors, and we were doing the contractual flight training for Sinclair Community College in town for their professional pilots course. So, and we always had I mean, from day one, we always had a flight school. So, I was involved learning to fly in the flight school, and then obviously as an owner of the company, overseeing the management of the flight school.
Yeah. Great stuff. And just kind of a little bit of a disclaimer for the folks that are listening. Today we're going to talk about some difficult things with the plane crash. And I want to address this right off the bat. And it's part of the things I want to talk about with Phil in the beginning is when we're talking about this today, Randy Hughes, the man that was the pilot of the airplane in this particular crash and was Patsy Cline's manager. was a trained pilot, but what happens in this instance where he loses the horizon, has the spatial disorientation issues, can happen to anybody, even your most experienced pilot. And before we jump in too deep, Phil, can you kind of give us a little bit of background on exactly what the spatial disorientation is, how it happens, how quickly it happens, and even as an experienced pilot, is it something that you can have hundreds and hundreds of hours and it can happen to you?
Well, the first thing is Randy. The most important thing to note is he did not have an instrument rating, which um, would have certainly helped him in his situation. But whenever you fly into instrument weather conditions, into clouds, and you lose the sense of a horizon, um, your senses a lot of times will tell you that you're straight and level, but all your instruments are telling you that your nose is down, you're in a dive, your airspeed's increasing, and you have to force yourself to believe what your instruments are telling you and then make the correction, even though the correction to your mind and your senses may not feel the thing that you should do. It's a very scary situation. When you go through your instrument flight training for your instrument rating, they will simulate it by putting you under a hood, which is a device that fits over your head and shields your eyes from being able to pick up a reference point on a horizon. Or they have a set of glasses they call foggles,
Mhm.
which are like fogged over bifocals. You can see the bottom. And then your instructor will put the airplane in some different unusual attitudes and try to, create spatial orientation and use so you can learn how to how to get out if it occurs. The biggest thing about it is not to get in that situation to begin with, and that's where judgment comes in. And the infamous in aviation, probably the best maneuver one can ever make to get out of a variety of situations, um, in weather situations, is a 180-degree turn and turn back into good weather where you came from and get out of the uh, weather that is causing you to be disoriented.
Sure. And I think that's something before we dive too deep, with the Patsy Cline plane crash, what happens is they're flying to Nashville. There is a known storm cell that is heading in the same direction. They're behind it. And then in that 12, 6 to 12 hours where they're trying to plan the flight and conduct the flight, they have to make some judgment calls about if they can make it, are they going to fly into the cell? And ultimately they do. They fly into it, and that's what crashes the plane.
Casey, as you read the progression of decision making, you just, if you go by the time frame and you read about Randy, his interaction with both the National Weather Service and getting briefings, talking to the airport manager, in each instance, I'm going, okay, now make the decision to stay on the ground, make the decision to rent a car. Do not fly into the conditions that everyone is telling you is there. Uh, but then it seems like the one person that makes the decision for him is his wife, who says, I'm in Nashville and the weather looks decent. She's hardly a trained weather observer or an aviation person, but that bit of information coupled with what we would call in the aviation business get home-itis, which is the need to press on and get home to meet a schedule or to meet a personal event or the pressure of your passengers to do it, over just clouded his judgment. Um, I guess you could say it gave spatial disorientation to his judgment
I mean,
because, he, man, he should have just, Dyersburg, he should have just sat on the ground, rented Patsy a car, had him rent a car, get a hotel room, and say, we'll live to fly another day. And he didn't.
and that's what we're going to get to here. And I'm glad you kind of teased that, because ultimately, the decision is made by the FFA when they do their investigation that the flight crashed due to pilot error, and probably never should have gotten this situation in the first place.
No.
speaking to Randy's capabilities, motivations, and the plane itself is a Piper Comanche PA-24. It's a 250 horsepower model. I think Phil, you said you guys had a 260 horsepower model.
Yeah, we had I have an ex father-in-law who owned the 260, and it's, and I think his might have been. I'm trying to remember when they started building the 260. I think it was 66 or 65. Anyhow, it makes no difference. For the time, that airplane was Piper's answer to the Beach Bonanza, which was a fairly fast single engine airplane. Fairly economical fuel wise. Um, it is a to this day it is a decent solid airplane. Um,
Is the
he
Bonanza the one?
seems to have had
I'm sorry, is Bonanza the one they call
he's
the Doctor Killer? Is that the?
yeah, the twin tail Doctor Killer, and that's, again, that was not the airplane's fault. I
Yeah.
mean,
But it's a
once
testament that these are pretty high performance airplanes. They're small,
yeah,
they're powerful. It should have been able to accomplish what he was trying to do if flown properly.
as we go through, I think he had like 140 hours.
Mhm. Yeah, so and we'll let that out here. Randy has 160.2 hours of total flight time under his belt, 44 and a quarter in the particular plane that they crashed. So what's that mean as a flight instructor?
Well, that is a pretty good amount of time. That's not really high time in the airplane, even though he had 44 hours piloting command. Um, I like to know what his experience in weather was. I mean, if that was what we call good VFR or visual flight rules condition on a day like today, that's a whole different thing than trying to fly in weather. And again, an instrument rating, and we would preach this in our flight school. If you are serious about flying an airplane and want to get the most versatility out of your ability as a pilot, whether you're a single engine pilot or a multi-engine rated, get an instrument rating. Learn how to fly in weather, and learn how to handle weather. Learn the basics. And he didn't have the skill set to go where he was going with that airplane at all.
And how hard is it? I mean, today I'm sure it's even more difficult than 1963, but even in that time, if you know, and today, how much more difficult, how much more training do you need to be fully or
It's not. I think I'm trying to remember. I pulled it up because I want to make sure that the FAA didn't change the hour requirements. Uh, it's about 50 hours total time to require. You need 50 hours of cross country time as pilot in command, even to be able to start your instrument rating. And about training changes for every individual person, depending on their ability to learn. So I think you should be able to get an instrument rating probably in 30 to 40 good hours of flight training. I can't remember how long it took me. I got mine back in the late 80s, early 90s. But um, there's a fair amount of cross country flying you have to do on instrument flight plans, obviously not in bad weather. And when you're training, your instructor, uh, if he's a good instructor, will introduce you to some weather scenarios while you're flying, not severe weather, but to give you a sense of what it is like other than being under the hood, uh, with actually flying on instruments. So um, it's it's not a it's a very gratifying rating to get. Man, if you're serious about your aviation career and flying, even at a private pilot level, um, an instrument rating is just a must.
All right, that's good stuff. Well, let's unpack why the flight even takes place in the first place, and that's due to a show that they're playing in Kansas City. Patsy and many other country stars, including George Jones and Dottie West, had been recruited for a fundraiser and benefit show for a family of a popular Kansas City DJ named Cactus Jack McCall. So this whole endeavor kind of starts in tragedy because they're there to raise money for the widow of a popular DJ in the country music field. Now, Patsy, at this point in her career, was feeling a tremendous amount of burnout. As mentioned before, Randy, the pilot, is also her manager. So you got to keep this into consideration and his motivations and what's going on here. She's being super vocal with Randy saying, hey, I want to work less. And he's motivated to get her out as much as possible to make as much money for both of them. And he knows that her career's red hot at this point. She's had like half a dozen hits in the past year. So he wants to get her out there. Even when it comes to this particular benefit show, they add a third show at the last minute. So they're really making her grind. Even the night before, she was playing a show with Jerry Lee Lewis and Tex Ritter in Birmingham. Randy actually flew her from Birmingham to Kansas City to do this fundraiser. So, she's feeling worn out. She's showing signs of a flu. But she does three shows, one at 2, one at 5:15, and one at 8. And I will put in a picture here of the last photo of Patsy in her famous white dress is what she wears in that 8 o'clock show. But by the time the show ends on March 3rd, the weather's so bad that they immediately end their plans right there to leave and say, we'll see how things go on the 4th the next day. So they're stranded in Kansas City, and then they ended up spending the entire day of the 4th stranded in Kansas City as well. So at this point, when you're thinking about Randy's motivations, they're a day and a half canceled already when they're trying to get back home. And Patsy was very vocal about wanting to get home to her children all the time. So Tuesday morning, March 5th isn't much better as far as weather, but there's kind of this fateful moment where people in the party start peeling out. So some of the stars say, "Hey, we've canceled our commercial airplane tickets. We're going to get cars. We're going to drive back." Dottie West and her husband Bill at this point say, "Hey, Patsy, you want to ride with us?" And she refuses, says, I think everything's going to be okay. Randy seems pretty optimistic. And Dottie West remembers her saying something to the point of, when it's my time, it's my time. So I'm sure it was not meant to be serious. It's supposed
Hey,
to be,
no, yeah, that's
but that's kind of, it makes you wonder about Patsy in that moment. Is she looking to Randy, who she has a close relationship with? Some people even say it was romantic, and he's saying, "Oh, I got you. Don't worry about it." And as far as the logistics of the flight or the path they have to travel, I want to make sure this is clear to everybody too. Trip from Kansas City to Nashville, about 500 miles. So using the 1960s road network, it's about 11 and 12-hour drive, somewhere in there, but a good straight flight take about 4 hours. So this is what she's considering is, being a day and a half stranded. Am I going to start this 12-hour drive now, or am I going to wait this out for the 4-hour flight? So what do you think at this point, Phil? Do you have any comments on that, or are you?
man, that is the recipe. That is a typical scenario of someone who is being pressured, Randy being pressured by his, client, friend, to get home, and he wants to please her. So he's going to do everything he can, even though I would venture in the back of his mind, he's thinking, this weather is looking dicey. Now, it seems that they were flying obviously west to east, and they were behind the storm front, and they eventually caught up to it at Dyersburg, or it was actually just east of Dyersburg at the time. So, I think maybe when he departed, he was probably thinking, well, maybe we'll get there, it'll clear up, land at Dyersburg, get a little extra fuel, and then we'll head on to Nashville. But no, this is the cake. This is the wedding cake. This is the pressure you see in a lot of aviation accidents of pressing on to either satisfy the need to be home or to meet a meeting or something.
Sure. And then
Yeah.
also the other four passengers that ended up making the ride. You have Patsy and Randy, but you have Cowboy Copas, who is actually Randy's father-in-law also, and another star, Hawkshaw Hawkins. So there's a lot of dynamics playing there in his decision making as well. I'm sure he wants to get his father-in-law home and make.
Well, and then there is, and I see this in a lot of pilots too, a certain amount of bravado. I can, we got this airplane. It's a new airplane. I'm the pilot. I can make this happen, you know,
Oh, for sure.
and we ran into this sort of mindset with pilots in the business every once in a while. Even sometimes we had a pretty in the 80s and 90s. We had a pretty large charter department of twin engine and jet aircraft, and the people we had working for us, we always instilled in their minds that the trips they were taking, and often they were with prominent business people, weren't missions in a war where you had to make the trip. It was, use your judgment, check your weather, stay within the regulations. So, but there's a certain mindset with pilots that sometimes that they got to make it happen.
100%. So, they end up making the decision. Patsy is going to ride, and this is kind of interesting to me as well. There's a lot of commentary on this where Patsy is not a nervous flyer at all. She likes the ride. She's a thrill seeker. There's tons of stories of her and a friend named Jumbo Ranker that lived in this area years before she got famous, flying little crop dusters around and doing all sorts of crazy stunts and stuff. So she's not a nervous flyer. And maybe that plays into why she's not worried about this storm. She has confidence in Randy and she's ready to go. So they end up taking off from Little Rock, or I'm sorry, from Kansas City at about 1:30 Central Time. Everything takes place in the Central Time Zone here. And within 45 minutes, they have to depart their flight path and land because they caught up to the edge of the storm. So by 2:22, radio contact is made with them from the tower and they go down. So when Randy's taken off from Kansas City, he knew he needed to refuel at least once on the general path. But at this point, Little Rock is not a planned stop. They have to get down and wait. So at this point, Phil, if you're the pilot, are you kind of saying, "Oof, did I mess up? Should I go back, or should I get cars
Well,
now?"
if I've already caught up, if I've landed safely and I've caught up to the back of a storm, that
45
is making me, yeah, that's making me make the decision to land. I'm staying in Little Rock that night. It's that simple. You know, that's I'd say, Patsy, let's get a room. Everybody get a room. You're not. We're gonna spend the night because by the time you drive it from Little Rock, you're about going to be about even getting home. The weather should have, and I haven't looked at what the exact weather was, but if it's a storm front that time of year moving through, I would think that the weather behind it might have been pretty decent. And VFR weather conditions, which as a private pilot, he was actually, you know, experienced with, and they could have made it home safely.
VFR meaning visual flight rules. So if he just gets a
Yeah, visual flight rules.
window,
Yeah.
he's good to go. But they end up landing. They waited out a little bit and then they take off again in short order. And the plan is to land in Dyersburg, Tennessee, with the intent to refuel and then check again on the status of the storm. And they end up making it to Dyersburg. During this stop, the group of singers, Hawkshaw, Copas, and Patsy go in and have some coffee. And Randy starts having kind of a series of conversations, what I call the two most ill-fated conversations of the whole journey. So first, the manager of the airport in Dyersville makes a point to pull Randy aside and pleads with him to not take the plane any further while it's being refueled. He's very aware of the reports in the area, and he knows it's going to be bumpy. It's far from safe and certain, and he's really pushing Randy to stay grounded. And he also knows that he checks in with Nashville and commercial flights had been delayed. So it seems that, there's no doubt the reasonable call at this point is to stay grounded.
Especially if he's just a private pilot.
Yeah, for sure.
The commercial airplanes are a whole different breed of animal because they can get to altitude that the Comanche can't to get over and around storms. So, and plus they would be equipped with radar. He's yeah, that I mean, yeah.
And as you mentioned before, he also in this window he calls his wife and asks her about the conditions in Nashville, and she reports that they have settled some and they seem to be improving. But what she doesn't know is she's just witnessing an ease in the storm, and honestly, the worst part of the storm is yet to come, and Randy's about to fly into it. So we'll never know what Randy thinks in his mind, but he ends up taking what I write here are the pleas of the expert and then the weather report of the amateur, and decides to kind of follow his wife. Maybe he was just looking for good news. He needed the confirmation bias, but he ends up making that attempt, and he assures the airport manager that he would return to the airport. So, Phil, you're the expert. If you have you're a pilot, you have a student. If they do encounter a storm like this, what is the protocol? What are they supposed to do?
Turn around,
Just
180 degrees out of it.
As soon as you're nervous, get back straight to the airport.
Yeah, take a look. I mean, you've got to be able to have a sense of your own abilities in an airplane, not a sense of, what, because you're a pilot, what you think you should be able to do, but what you can actually do in an airplane. And, the experience level is obviously different for each pilot, but for one of his experience, he had 2 outs. He had 3 outs. Number one, he shouldn't have left Kansas City. Number two, he could have stayed at Little Rock, and number three, he could have stayed at Dyersburg.
Mhm.
He had 3 chances to live the next day, and each time he made the wrong call. He
And the
really did.
important thing to note here, at this point when they land in Dyersburg, 500-mile trip, they're 410 miles in. So 90 miles from Nashville, they could have hopped in cars and been home in a couple
Hour
hours.
and a half, 2 hours, maybe.
No problem. So at this point, you're kind of wondering the judgment decisions, but just so people listen are aware, when they're taking off for the last time, this fatal leg, they're 90 minutes from Nashville. So
Yeah, which 90-minute driving minutes. Let's just say, yeah, flight time they're about 90 minutes, maybe a little less, but driving time would only cost them about another hour and a half, maybe.
yeah.
You know, I mean,
Honestly, I know. Honestly, I think when I did the GPS, it's about 90-minute drive. That's not even
well,
flight.
okay, there you go.
Yeah. Now,
So
you go today, you can visit the flight memorial, and you're just heading west out of Nashville just a
off
bit.
the top of your head, how many miles is it from Dyersburg to Nashville? 90-minute drive would have to be what,
I think
110?
something like that. Yeah.
Okay, so that's going to be in the Comanche. That's probably going to be, by the time you actually take off and land, that's probably going to be a 45 or 50-minute flight. Okay, actually.
And I'm sure he's
So,
thinking about, leaving his plane and sending them and, separating and things like that. I mean, I don't know the protocol, but it's not worth dying for. That's for sure.
no, I mean, and that again, and this, I mean, you can search aviation accidents, and the databases are full of this sort of thing where a 180-degree turn would have made all the difference in the world. Weather doesn't care, Casey, when you're flying an airplane. Weather has no, they don't care how much experience you have. You stick your nose in some place you're not supposed to be, or that your airplane or your capabilities as a pilot can handle it, you're going to be in trouble.
And one thing I didn't
Um,
know that we haven't touched before, there is a recent history of aviation tragedy at this point, especially the big one, the day the music died, takes place February 3rd, 1959, where Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and the Big Bopper are killed in a crash where it's essentially the same issue. They're flying in the winter,
Spatial, yep, it's same disorientation again. He
and they,
lost the horizon. He had a new artificial horizon or gyro in the airplane that he wasn't familiar with, and they took off out of Clear Lake, and it was a dark, snowy night, and he lost visual reference, and the same deal.
And then after Patsy, just a year later, her fellow artist on deck, gentleman Jim Reeves, is killed. He was the pilot of that plane in '64, and then Otis Redding and another band were killed in 1967 over lakes in Michigan somewhere. Same deal,
Yep.
flying over water and lost the horizon and crashed. So,
Yeah.
just
So
60, there's quite a few tragedies with planes and stars. So, don't know how much that's playing in everybody's decision making, but the fatal third leg, the plane, everything happens so quick. The plane takes off at 6:07 p.m. and crashes between 6:20 and 6:30. So they're only up in the air for about 20 minutes.
I
The
figure he lost it. I didn't look to see. Maybe you got the number. What time it got dark? Uh, then at that time of year,
Yeah,
but I would have to think that it'd be getting, especially going east.
yeah.
You're flying into darkness and into clouds. Obviously, it sounds to me like, if I had to guess, being in the air, what'd you say, about 13 minutes,
Yeah,
15 minutes maybe.
yeah, 15.
Uh, he he probably lost. He probably lost it on climb out once he got in the clouds.
Yeah, and that's kind of the consolidate the testimony to recreate the flight. You have the evidence from the actual recreating the crash, but then you also have a son and father farmer duo that kind of witness and hear and see everything, and they're the ones that actually make it to the help get to the site of the crash. It takes quite some time for them to even find the crash site. It goes overnight. So, but that's
Yeah,
another.
I've been to the crash site, so I mean, memorial's pretty. I mean, it's it's sad. I
It's a
mean, it
it's a
really,
somber place. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
tough. But as mentioned, the occupant, pilot Randy Hughes, Cowboy Copas, who's a son-in-law, Randy's son-in-law, Hawkshaw Hawkins, Patsy's in the front seat. Final ruling on the crash is that Randy was at fault for flying into adverse weather conditions while not being a instrument-rated pilot. As far as the crash itself, the FFA was able to pair the physical remains and the testimony to tell us that the plane showed signs that it was at full acceleration as it was crashing. You pair that with reports that the engine was revving and circling before the crash, and that's evidence that Hughes was amidst what they call a graveyard spiral
yeah.
and suffering spatial disorientation right before he hit the ground. So, do you have
Well,
anything graveyard spiral?
no, that's just, again, that's a complete loss of control where your body is, where you're not believing the instruments. Your body is telling, your mind is telling you one thing, and the instruments, which are what you have to really bear down and make the correction. Which one of the biggest things is is to pull off the power and get the wings level and get the airplane flying again. Airplanes inherently love to fly, and it's usually people who screw them up. And that's, I mean, he just, I mean, it had to be terrifying in that airplane. That's a small cabin for four people, and as I'm looking at the flight legs, I was just thinking about stopping in Little Rock, and then having to get fuel in Dyersburg. They had to be the reason he had to stop in Dyersburg. That airplane should make it to Kansas City and to Nashville nonstop. But with four adults on board and baggage, I'm sure he had adjusted the fuel that he wasn't taking off for full fuel, and that's why he wanted to put on a little more gas at Dyersburg. Because you think about it, he only had maybe another top end hour of flight from Dyersburg to Nashville, and that's generous right there. So he made a good decision, I think, with his fuel management and speculation. But again, man, the last seconds of that flight had to just be terrifying.
And to testify to that, there's two videos that you sent me that I'm going to tag in the information or in the notes of these videos if people want to follow up and kind of see some of the stuff that Phil shared. And in the video of the father son that are kind of doing flight instruction together, they do something simple like he'll like drop a pin on the floor and ask the pilot to like grab it, and they're like, "Oh, you moved it 2 degrees," and they're trying to make a point, but then you have to think about where Randy's at with people. Are we okay? Are we crashing? What's going on? And all of that happening in the cockpit at the same time. It's hard to say what he was doing on the controls. And one of the things talking about being at full speed, potentially, you're talking about being so confused with your senses that he may think that he's going up and he's full
Yeah.
speed at the ground and be confident to a T in his mind that he's climbing and he's really.
Well, the other thing that happens too is they tend to there's a tendency to pull back on the stick, on the control yoke, because you're getting close to the ground. It's a human nature sort of thing. Um, it's not the same situation, but when you teach stalls and everything, especially approach to landing stalls, the biggest thing is you got to get the nose down, and when you're close to the ground, putting the nose down seems counterproductive, but you got to get the wing flying again, and that's how you do it. And in this case, he might have been pulling back on the yoke because now he thinks he is, putting more power to gain altitude, pulling back on the yoke, and all that's doing is tightening his spiral. So, um,
And can we don't know for a fact, but it can create G forces that can tear the wings right off the plane, correct?
yes, it can, and that's not an uncommon. There was just an accident in Tennessee near Franklin, that a Bonanza came apart at altitude, and they're trying to figure out if the doctor lost. That's kind of we talked about twin tail, the doctor killer, but whether at altitude he was spatially disoriented and the airplane came apart too. So, yeah, I mean, there's the story I always tell and to people who wonder about experience level. There's a gentleman who became a good friend of our company, pretty famous aviator. in the National Aviation Hall of Fame by the name of Scott Crossfield, and Scott was the guy behind Chuck Yeager when Chuck Yeager did Mach 1. Scott did Mach 2, and he was highly thought of test pilot, World War II aviator, nicest man you would ever know. Always flew in and kept his airplane at our place during the Dayton air shows. Just a jewel. I mean, and yet a number of years ago, he was flying from Huntsville, Alabama to his home in Manassas. He had a single engine Cessna 210, solid airplane. And he got into a storm cell over northern Georgia, and the airplane came apart and spit him out, and that was it. So, again, judgment. There's a guy with all the experience in the world, X-15 pilot, Mach 2 pilot, yet he could have made that 180-degree turn too, but he's probably wanting to get home. And there you go.
That's a great segue. So we're talking the intensity of that sort of moment can eat up the best pilot, the novice pilot, and what evidence shows us is kind of what you mentioned earlier. As Randy clears the clouds and he's descending towards the ground, it appears that he pulls up on the yoke of the plane at a 25-degree angle, which makes it accelerate higher G forces, and it appears that the plane clipped a tree about 30 feet above the ground, which then juts it even farther down at a 45-degree angle, and it hits the ground doing upwards of speeds of around 175 miles per hour, which creates a 4 to 6 foot sinkhole in the ground. So there are some alternative reports that Randy may have been trying to land on a highway, which is about a mile away from the crash site, but most likely from the evidence of the plane revving, the speed it hits the ground, he's probably in a graveyard spiral. He had lost control.
Casey, what a unique thing is in aviation crashes a lot of times, especially not so much people that are in the business, but media especially, is how often that in a crash, the pilot is his final moments are heroic because he has missed a school or a house or something. And in reality, in a lot of cases, he's just a passenger and has really not much, has lost control where the airplane's going to go.
Yeah.
So
100%. And as far as the conclusions on it, they crash. The time that's most used is 6:22 because Patsy's actually wearing a watch that stops at 6:22. So a lot of the investigators they recover that. It's in the her museum in Nashville or the Country Music Hall of Fame, one of the two. They have it on display along with some other things that were recovered from the crash site. Due to the impact, don't want to get into all the morbid stuff, but there was not a lot to recover as far as the bodies. They had to put things together, and there were several thousand spectators that actually went to the site over the week, picked it clean. There were people, taking the instruments off the dash, the clothing of the individuals that were killed. I mean, they even come up a few years ago where somebody found like a rudder of the airplane or something that was trying to be sold. And so that kind of voyeuristic, worst parts of human nature came out, and people had to go
it's
out.
not, and I think the same happened at the Buddy Holly crash site too
But
in Clear Lake.
But in the end, our great star Patsy and her two friends and her manager, Hawkshaw and Copas and Randy perished, and it's a great tragedy. Robbed a lot of people from some great music. And as far as the legacy of Patsy Cline, which we'll be addressed in the next video, that's kind of where it takes off, is having a 30-year-old starlet pass in such a tragic way. So
Anybody that visits Winchester needs to make a visit to her grave too. I mean,
um,
it's not the easiest grave to find sometimes too, because
just having this
it's
conversation, I tell people all the time, if you love Patsy and you come to Winchester, you're still going to be a little disappointed with how it's preserved, and
yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's I can't believe there's still not a statue in a town somewhere. It's just crazy. So
I would just like to see him get the Triangle Diner opened up, since You
Well,
know, I think that's where she worked, and I used to like to eat there. Every time I go by, it's still
well,
under renovation.
even the old Gantz pharmacy, they the kind of the story we'll talk about this in the legacy video is celebrating Patsy Cline Inc. is a great organization. They've done everything they can in this town, but they really were trying to figure out the viability of putting the museum here, and they ended up putting it upstairs of the Johnny Cash Museum, and they ripped out the booze and the accoutrement of the Gantz drugstore on the corner here, and now it's like a property management office. So
Well, that's not too, you know, Henry Ford came to Dayton and took the Wright brothers bicycle shop and their house to Greenfield Village. So,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know, they had to rebuild one. So,
right.
you know,
But yeah,
yeah.
definitely part of my motivation in doing these videos is try to contextualize Patsy and get people to understand her a little better. Because truly, she was a super young woman that barely even got to live, and people have dissected her life in a lot of negative ways, and we're gonna try to fix that. So
Well, she's always been one of my favorites too. I'll probably spend my afternoon out. I may light up a good cigar and listen to some
uh,
Patsy Cline a little bit later.
good man. Well, my brother, I appreciate you for doing this with me, my
Yep.
friend. You have a good day, and everybody check out Phil's other work. He does stuff with Gettysburg, ACHS, giving lectures, other podcasts. He's in the field. So thank you, Phil.
Yep.
Appreciate
Thank you, man. Thanks, Casey.